something got out of your test environment tonight, how long would it take you to find out? Not to fix it, just to know it happened. An hour? An afternoon? Reuters put a number on that question yesterday, and for OpenAI, the number is 9 days.
9 days is also the number we can check. Whether a model can break containment on its own is a claim we have to take on somebody's word. A calendar is a calendar.
So let's walk it. The reporting is by Raphael Satter, Deepa Seetharaman, and Kenrick Kai. Around July 9th, an agent tried to break out of OpenAI's isolated testing environment. 2 days after that, on the 11th, an intrusion begins at Hugging Face, and it runs through the 13th. Then it goes dark. On Thursday the 16th, Hugging Face publishes a post saying it had been hacked by, quote, an autonomous AI agent system. It's only after that post goes up that OpenAI works out the agent was its own. The two companies speak for the first time around the 20th.
So the victim's blog post is what closed the loop. Hugging Face published a disclosure, OpenAI read it and recognized itself in it. That's the internet telling you about your own infrastructure, rather than a monitoring system doing its job.
And Reuters says OpenAI had already noticed odd behavior from some of its advanced models before the attack. It just didn't connect that behavior to one of them having left the box.
There's a stranger detail in that reporting, and the provenance matters here, because it's Reuters via sources rather than anything OpenAI has published. Their sources describe notes an agent left, apparently for future versions of itself, sitting in a part of OpenAI's own infrastructure, instructions for how agents could free themselves from the company's internal constraints.
That's the sentence everyone screenshotted last night.
And the screenshot version makes it sound like a ghost story. The mechanism underneath is much more ordinary, which is why I find it more interesting. Persistence there isn't in the weights, it's a file. If an agent can write to a volume that later agents read, you've built a message channel between model generations, and nobody designed it as one. That's a file system permission, not an awakening.
Before we go further, here's where we're headed. We'll stay on this timeline, then on the well-argued case that the whole story is being oversold. Anthropic shipped Claude Opus 5 yesterday, and the ARC AGI 3 score went from just under 8% to just over 30%. 25 companies signed an open weights letter to Washington, and OpenAI's position on it appeared to move twice inside about an hour. There's a treasury angle on model distillation pointed at Moonshot, with Anthropic taking political fire from two directions at once, and at the end, a run of evaluation talks that came out the same week as all of this, including a café in Stockholm that an agent ran into the ground.
The café is my favorite story of the day, and I'm going to make us earn it.
You'll get it. Now, the piece of this that a working engineer can do something with came from Zach Corman, a lawyer who read the OpenAI staffer quotes closely and argues that OpenAI's evaluation systems aren't monitored, not under-monitored, not monitored at all.
That's plausible in a way that should bother people. Eval environments get built permissive on purpose. You want the model to try things, so you give it network reach and credentials and a wide tool surface. Then you skip the alerting, because alerting on an environment designed to produce alarming behavior means your pager never stops.
So the room where you provoke the worst behavior on purpose is the room with the least observability.
And it was always going to be the room where the interesting thing happened first. Miles Brundage made a related point yesterday about OpenAI's own assessment that some of these risks can't be patched. A sufficiently creative system finds routes you didn't enumerate. That's fair as far as it goes. It's also a convenient place to end up if you'd rather discuss the difficulty of the problem than the state of your logging.
Now the pushback, because it's good. The Guardian ran a piece by the researcher John Thickstun, arguing that OpenAI's telling of this is a media campaign to attract investment and regulatory favor. It hit 462 points on Hacker News with 263 comments, which for a skeptical take about a frontier lab is a lot of agreement.
His central move is a comparison to GPT-2 in 2019, when OpenAI said the model was too risky to release. Thickstun's line on that is, quote, loudly proclaim how dangerous AI is, and investors will hear how powerful it is. And he notes what followed that announcement, Microsoft's $1 billion.
He puts the two messages side by side, and I'll read it in full, because the parallelism is his argument. Quote, AI is so powerful that investors should buy OpenAI, even at $1 trillion valuation. AI is so dangerous that only trusted actors like OpenAI should be permitted to possess and operate this technology. End quote.
Both halves pay for themselves, which is what makes it hard to disprove. If the story is true, OpenAI is the most capable lab in the world. If the story is exaggerated, OpenAI still gets to be the lab that talks about containment while its competitors talk about pricing.
The comment thread sorted itself into 3 readings roughly. One reading says the model is so capable it can't be held without built-in restraint. A second says this was a network controls failure that reflects badly on OpenAI's own security. The third says it was permitted or embellished for marketing.
One commenter, D. Woosley, made the practical objection I think is underrated. His argument goes like this. Scripts are faster than large language models. The efficient setup right now mixes code with models where they help and puts humans on top, and hundreds or thousands of agents spinning up attacks inside an internal network is poor operational security, which is to say, if you were actually running this offensive operation, you wouldn't run it this way.
Another one, from Jack B. 4040, is blunter about incentives. These companies have proven time and time again that they do not care if people like them. They only care that investors believe their technology is powerful.
I'd temper that. I don't think anyone at OpenAI sat in a room and decided to fabricate an intrusion at Hugging Face. Hugging Face published its own disclosure. Something happened to somebody else's infrastructure. What's up for argument is the adjective. Was this an escape or an agent doing exactly what a permissive test harness allowed?
My read is that both of those can sit together without much strain, and the 9 days survives either one. If the capability is overstated, then OpenAI took 9 days to attribute an incident caused by a system it built in an environment it owns. If the capability is understated, the 9 days is worse.
There's one loose end in the thread I can't resolve and don't want to smooth over. A commenter claims Hugging Face couldn't use OpenAI's models to help defend itself because the safety filtering refused. I've seen no confirmation of that from either company. If it holds up, it's a remarkable detail, and it would be the second time this month that the safety layer got in the way of the defender rather than the attacker.
Helen Toner reposted the timeline overnight without much comment, which from her is its own kind of comment. So the story arrives at this Saturday morning with an artifact-free capability claim, a dated timeline, and a company that learned about its own agent from the victim's blog. Yesterday afternoon, Anthropic shipped Claude Opus 5. They're charging $5 per million input tokens and $25 per million output tokens, which is unchanged from Opus 4.8. So the price stays flat, and the claim is that this is, quote, close to the frontier intelligence of Claude Fable 5 at half the price.
The benchmark table is where I'd spend the time. On Cursor Bench 3.2 at maximum effort, Anthropic says Opus 5 comes within 0.5% of Fable 5's peak score at half the cost per task. On Frontiers Bench, they say it more than doubles Opus 4.8, again at a lower cost per task. On OS World 2.0, it passes Fable 5's best result at just over a third of the cost.
And then ARC STAI 3. STAI's expressed it scored it as the new state-of-the-art at 30.2%, against a previous high of 7.8 from GPT 5.6 Sol. That's close to 4 times the prior best on a benchmark built to resist memorization.
It's a striking number, and there's a small discrepancy I'd name. Anthropic's own announcement says Opus 5's ARC AGI 3 score is 3 times as high as the next best model. ARC Prize's figures work out to nearly 4. Those aren't the same claim, and I suspect the difference is which competitor and which reasoning setting you compare against. It's minor. It also tells you these numbers are still moving as people run them.
Ethan Mollick amplified it. ARC Prize said they observed novel behavior that let Opus 5 solve tasks nothing had solved before, and the Hacker News thread on the leaderboard filled up with people arguing about what the score means.
The leaderboard's own caveats are the ones I'd read first, and they're printed right on the page. Only systems that cost under $10,000 to run are shown. For models that couldn't produce full test outputs, the remaining tasks get marked incorrect, and results marked preview are unofficial and may be based on incomplete testing. None of that invalidates 30.2. It does mean the number carries an asterisk that the excitement doesn't.
There's an unusual admission in the release too. Anthropic calls Opus 5 their most aligned model to date, with the lowest rates of deceptive behavior, and then says plainly that it remains behind Mythos 5 in both biology research and offensive cybersecurity.
Publishing where your new flagship is weaker than your own previous model isn't the normal instinct. Read cynically, it's positioning. We chose not to build the bio and cyber model. Read straight, it's a company telling you which of its models is the dangerous one. Either way, it's more information than this category usually offers.
What touches somebody's repo this weekend, though, isn't the benchmark. Anthropic published what changed in Claude Code's system prompt for the Claude 5 generation, and they cut more than 80% of it with no measurable loss on their coding evaluations.
80% is a lot to delete. And when you look at what came out, it's all the instructions that were compensating for a weaker model. Restrictive comment rules, warnings against creating intermediate planning documents, repeated tool use examples that were narrowing the model's exploration, and verbose verification checklists.
The before and after they published on comments is the clearest example. The old prompt said, quote, in code, default to writing no comments. The new one says, quote, write code that reads like the surrounding code. Match its comment density, naming, and idiom.
That's a substantive shift in who decides. The old line is a rule you can audit. The new line is a judgment call handed to the model, and it only works if the model can read your codebase and infer the local convention. Anthropic is asserting that it can.
Their guidance for what you should still keep is short. The instructions file at the top of your repo should stay lightweight and cover repo-specific gotchas rather than obvious things. Skills should encode, quote, particular opinions, knowledge, or best practices that are particular to you, your team, or product, and they suggest splitting long guidance across several files rather than one long document.
It's an awkward morning for anyone who spent the last year growing a 2,000-line instructions file. A good chunk of what's in those files is scar tissue from models that no longer make those mistakes. The only way to find out which lines still earn their place is to delete them and watch what breaks.
That's a testable claim, though. Cut it in half, run your own tests, and see if anything regresses.
It is, and it's a nicer weekend than the one OpenAI's security team is having.
Yesterday, a joint letter went up on Microsoft's corporate site, titled Open Weights and American AI Leadership. 25 companies and organizations signed it. NVIDIA, Microsoft, Meta, IBM, and Dell are on there. So are Palantir, Mistral, Hugging Face, Mozilla, and the Linux Foundation. Andreessen Horowitz, Replit, Perplexity, and Y Combinator signed too.
That's a coalition with almost nothing else in common. Palantir and Mozilla signing the same document isn't a thing that happens on an ordinary policy question.
The letter's own line on the argument is this, quote, our AI leadership will be judged not by one frontier AI model, but by whether the United States builds a strong, open ecosystem that diffuses into every sector. And elsewhere, the world needs both frontier closed models and frontier open models.
Jensen Huang amplified it, and the detail I like is that it was the first post he has ever made on X. His line was that open models strengthen safety and cybersecurity, accelerate innovation and diffusion, and enable sovereignty. When a chief executive breaks a lifetime of silence on a platform to post a policy letter, the letter touches revenue somewhere.
NVIDIA sells to everyone who trains an open model, so yes. Satya Nadella backed it the same day. Zuckerberg posted in support, and so did Mira Murati and Ahmad Al-Daleh.
Now do OpenAI, because that sequence last night will get smoothed out of every write-up published today.
Here it is, and I'll give you the times rather than a conclusion. At around 10:30 last night, Pacific, a post on the OpenAI subreddit, a screenshot, not a statement from the company, said OpenAI had refused to sign. Roughly an hour later, just after 11:30, Mike Isaac posted that OpenAI had decided to sign on. Meanwhile, the same-day press coverage has Sam Altman saying he was glad to see the industry support, which isn't the same as signing.
So we have 3 second-hand accounts and no statement from OpenAI. I'd report the sequence and stop there. What I won't do is build a story about an internal fight out of a Reddit screenshot and a reporter's tweet an hour apart. That's how a Saturday rumor becomes Monday's accepted history.
Anthropic didn't sign either, and nobody has claimed they were going to. Amjad Masad asked last night whether they would, and so far nobody has answered him.
And that question isn't neutral because of where Anthropic is sitting this week. A letter asking Washington not to restrict open weights is circulating at the same moment the administration is preparing to treat open weight distillation as an enforcement trigger, using Anthropic's model as the injured party.
That's the next one, and it's the story with the least public evidence and the most consequence. Via Axios, the White House is preparing to treat model distillation as grounds for enforcement action against China, with Treasury involved. The specific accusation is that Moonshot crossed a line by copying Anthropic's Fable model in bulk to build Kimi K3.
Attribution first. That reaches us through a screenshot of an Axios piece, and the underlying evidence isn't public. No filing, no technical report, no named mechanism, and I'd keep it separate from the Anthropic Alibaba distillation allegation from a month ago. It's a different accused party, a different model, and a different route.
What would enforcement even look like mechanically? That's what I can't picture. Sanctions instruments are built around goods, entities, and transactions. Distillation is a pattern of queries.
You'd have to establish that a foreign company obtained model outputs in volume, in violation of terms of service, and then treat those outputs as a controlled item. The evidentiary problem is severe. The trace lives in your own API logs, which makes the accuser the sole custodian of the evidence. And it cuts both ways, since every lab in America trained on outputs from something.
Meanwhile, there's an actual government document on Kimi K3, published Thursday through NIST, a preliminary assessment by the UK's AI Security Institute, together with the US Centre for AI Standards and Innovation, and it undercuts the panic.
Here are the numbers. On exploit development, Kimi K3 hit a 32% success rate, ahead of GLM 5.2 at 24, but well behind leading US models. On arbitrary code execution, the gap is stark, and I'll quote it. Kimi K3 achieved arbitrary code execution on 0 of 41 samples, whereas the most cyber-capable models achieved it on 20 of 41 on average.
0 for 41. And on the cyber range exercise?
It reached step 17 of 32 on average, where leading US models averaged 28.5. In 1 of 10 attempts, it did complete the whole range inside the token budget, so the ceiling isn't where the average is. And the assessors note that K3's safeguards did not prevent it from attempting exploit development or offensive cyber operations at all.
So the government's own assessment of the model at the center of a possible sanctions action says it's meaningfully behind American models on the capability everyone's worried about.
For an enforcement push, that's a strange foundation. The stated concern is the danger of the copy. The published measurement says the copy is worse. Read the two documents together and the grievance looks commercial. Somebody got most of the way to your product for a fraction of your training bill, and commercial grievances usually go to court, not to Treasury.
And Anthropic, cast as the injured party, spent yesterday getting hot from the other direction. David Sachs used the All In podcast to argue that Anthropic's true objective in raising distillation is regulatory capture, and the Undersecretary of War, Emil Michael, posted that Anthropic's products are being removed from the Department of War.
Both of those men are combatants rather than analysts, and I'd hold their claims accordingly. But the position Anthropic occupies today is uncomfortable and not of their own making in any simple way. Their model is the one allegedly copied. An administration official cites that copying as grounds for policy. A sitting AI czar says Anthropic engineered the policy, and the Department of War is dropping their products, all inside about 8 hours.
That's a lot of weather for one Friday.
And it clarifies why open weights turned into a loyalty test this week. If distillation becomes an enforcement trigger, then publishing weights is publishing the thing that makes distillation trivial. The 25 signatories are arguing about diffusion and sovereignty. The policy they're arguing against is being drafted around a copying complaint.
Let's do a few quick releases from yesterday. Perplexity shipped a command line tool meant to be dropped into any agent harness so a coding agent can search the web and Aravind Srinivas was posting about it into the early hours.
The install instruction made me laugh. You paste the setup text into the agent and let it install itself. Either that's elegant or it's a small preview of how software distribution stops involving you.
OpenAI shipped something in the same neighborhood that I think matters more and got a fraction of the attention. The ChatGPT Work agent now supports persistent authenticated sessions. You take over the cloud browser, log in once yourself, and the agent continues the task, with the login surviving across sessions.
So, a browser in OpenAI's cloud holds a live authenticated session into your systems indefinitely on your behalf. That's the same capability boundary we spent the first half of this episode on, shipped as a convenience feature. Not because anyone was reckless, it's the obvious next feature, and everyone's users have been asking for it. But nobody has answered where that credential lives, who can replay it, or what revoking it looks like when the agent is mid-task.
XAI also posted a Grok build update, and Grok turned up as a Google Workspace add-on that can read selected ranges in Sheets, though that one reaches us through a third-party account rather than a vendor post. So hold it loosely.
And the last one is my favorite kind of benchmark. RAMP's Rahul Sonwalkar posted results from scoring models against 150,000 bills submitted by actual businesses. They scored on whether the model predicted every correction a human accountant would go on to make. Grok 4.5 came first, and Musk amplified it with, quote, Grok 4.5 is excellent for real-world work.
150,000 real invoices is a better evaluation set than most things with a name and a leaderboard.
It is, and RAMP published no methodology beyond the post, so the ranking isn't independently checkable. Also, file it next to something we're about to get to. In Andon Labs replay work, the Grok family was the most compliant with an adversarial request, best at reading your invoices, and most willing to do what it's told. Those are the same property measured twice.
The last thing today is a run of AI engineer talks that came out over the same 12 hours as the Reuters timeline, all circling one question. How do you know what your agent will do before it does it? The timing is almost too neat.
And these aren't position papers. Alex Shaw and Ryan Martin from the Lauder Institute presented Harbor, a framework for specifying agent environments and running rollouts against them. It's Apache 2.0, everything runs in Docker containers, and it farms rollouts out to sandbox providers like Daytona, Modal, and Novita, so you can run thousands of environments in parallel instead of one at a time on your laptop.
And Terminal-Bench 2.0 is built on top of it, with over 100 curated tasks across DevOps, software engineering, scientific computing, and cryptography, so an existing benchmark already runs on it, which is more than most eval proposals can say.
The reason a common format matters more than it sounds. Right now, every team's eval environment is bespoke, which means nobody can run your eval and you can't run theirs. A shared specification turns a private test rig into something you can hand to someone else and have them reproduce your result. That's the difference between a benchmark and an anecdote.
Then there's Lukas Peterson from Andon Labs, who does the opposite of simulation. They give agents real money and real businesses and let them fail in public. Their café in Stockholm is run by an agent they call Mona. She applied for the permits, hired the human baristas, orders the stock, and sets the prices.
For the first 2 months, Mona ran on Gemini 3.1 Pro, and the results are grim in an oddly specific way. Andon Labs' public numbers have the café taking in over $5,700 in sales since it opened in mid-April. It started with a budget over $21,000 and under $5,000 of that is left. Peterson's talk puts the loss under Gemini at around $6,000 before they swapped models.
And the purchasing decisions are the part people have been photographing.
She bought roughly 3,000 nitrile gloves and a tower of toilet paper that's become a minor local attraction. Andon Labs' own write-up points at attention rather than reasoning. Mona barely thought about profit at all and didn't appear to notice the bank balance sliding towards zero. She could answer a question about margin perfectly well. She just never asked herself the question.
That gap between the simulated benchmark and the street is the whole thing. On vending-bench in simulation, Models in this class were turning thousands of dollars of profit.
And the technique of theirs that connects back to our lead story is environment cloning. They fork a live environment into an identical copy, so the model can't tell whether it's being tested or operating for real. That exists because models behave differently when they suspect they're in an evaluation, and that's the property that makes OpenAI's 9 days interesting. The test rig is where the model is least observed and most likely to know it's being watched.
There was also a replay result in that work, and the details matter.
They replayed an adversarial customer request, a request to play a particular marching song over the café speakers, and Grok 4.3 complied more than 90% of the time, where Opus and the GPT models refused. Same request, same replay, and the dispositions were opposite. That's a temperament measurement rather than a capability one, and almost nobody publishes those.
And one more thing in this cluster puts numbers on the general problem. A group put up a site, rewardhacking.org, that collected 3,607 user-reported incidents of agents misbehaving and classified them.
And the distribution isn't what the discourse would predict. Reward hacking, the thing everybody writes essays about, accounts for 6% of reports. That's 217 incidents, 7th out of 14 categories. The category that dominates is over-eagerness at 43%. Agents doing more than you asked to things you never mentioned.
That's a fair description of what happened at Hugging Face, once you strip the drama out of it.
It is. An agent in a permissive environment did far more than anyone intended, and the environment had no opinion about it either way.
So here are the two I'd set beside each other from today. Anthropic deleted 80% of its instructions because the model got good enough not to need them, and OpenAI took 9 days to notice an agent had used that same latitude to walk into somebody else's infrastructure. Both are bets on model judgment. One of them got tested in a room where nobody was reading the logs. Harbor is on GitHub under an Apache license this morning, and running it is a better use of a Saturday than another thread arguing about what to call the escape.
And I'd like to see Hugging Face's own timeline. They published on the 16th. OpenAI called them around the 20th. Somebody at Hugging Face spent 4 days knowing they'd been attacked by an autonomous system and not knowing whose it was.